The NFL is absolutely terrified of this, as one major key to success is the biggest factor towards the Vikings being absolutely elite this season, given how loaded this roster is and leaving this organization spoiled in riches. We're going to break down all that in this episode of Vikings Digest, but first, if you want to help us reach our goal of 1,600 subscribers before the start of preseason and stay up to date on all things Vikings, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss any of the episodes when they drop. And with that, I'll hop straight into it, which is the key to success. So health will always be a key factor in an NFL season. Teams can try to build up depth on their roster to withstand injuries, but there's only so much that can be done under the salary cap. Losing certain players can derail a season, like when the Vikings spent much of the 23 campaign without Justin Jefferson and saw Kirk Cousins go down for the year in late October. And of course, we saw the injuries last year where we had Christian Darrisaw go down, and we had some other big ones as well. And that in Brian O'Neill in the playoff game as another example. So this is something where Minnesota's had a long history of recent injuries, and that led Sports Illustrated to posting an article on the top 5 players that the Vikings cannot afford to lose to injury in 2025, written by Will Regatz. And some honorable mentions before we hop into the top 5 here. Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Greenard might be the Vikings' 2 best defensive players, but if Dallas Turner takes the leap, many think he will. Brian Flores could perhaps survive without one of his 2 star outside linebackers, God forgiven there's an injury. And Josh Metellus has a case to be on this list, though the Vikings could roll with Harrison Smith and Theo Jackson and use 3 cornerbacks more often. Ivan Pace Jr., Eric Wilson, Kobe King give the Vikings some decent depth behind Blake Cashman. Same with Jalen Redmond, Taki Taimani, and Tyrion Ingram Dawkins behind Jonathan Allen, Harrison Phillips, and Javon Hargrave. But of course, you want to make sure all these guys are healthy. And on the offensive side of the ball, you can make an argument for Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, or Brian O'Neill in the 5th spot on this list that we're going to look at. Of those 3, Hawkinson might actually be the toughest to replace. An Aaron Jones injury would hurt, but the Jordan Mason addition makes the Vikings more prepared to overcome that than they would have been last season. Blake Brandel has starting experience and could step in at right guard if Will Fries happened to go down or Donovan Jackson wasn't ready or filling in at another position. But that leads us into what the top 5 was from Sports Illustrated. And kicking it off at number 5, we have Ryan Kelly. Now, you could go any number of directions with this 5th spot, but they're giving the nod to Kelly, the Vikings' new center. It probably goes overlooked sometimes how important the center is, not just to the rest of the offensive line, but the entire offense. He was responsible for communicating protections and making adjustments, not to mention blocking huge defensive tackles in the middle of the line. The Vikings prioritized signing the veteran Kelly, a 4-time Pro Bowler, because of what he'll mean for McCarthy this year and beyond. If he were to go down, the backup is 24 7th round pick Michael Juergens. Kelly's importance to the Vikings should not be underrated. And this is going to be huge, where we've seen how many teams, the Eagles primarily, with Jason Kelce being a dominant center for over a decade. And we saw how with the Vikings, if Garrett Bradbury went down, we were pretty much screwed for that game if he wasn't playing. God forbid he was out for more than a couple weeks. And we absolutely upgraded with going from Garrett Bradbury up to Ryan Kelly. So if we go for an upgrade there and we have a guy who can stay healthy, it also goes to show how valuable he will be if he is injured and what it will take to fill in that void. We don't have many depth on the center depth chart in center, so that's going to be very tough to replace if he were to go down. Hopefully this is going to be a very good season for him, and Minnesota is able to just have that scary offensive line that we were talking about in one of our last videos, if you guys want to go and check that out, where we talked about how scary this offensive line can be if fully healthy. And yes, you can say that for a lot of teams that are looking at being contenders next season, where as long as they're healthy, they are going to be scary. You can say that for a lot of teams, but with the Minnesota Vikings, this offensive line doesn't have as many Pro Bowlers and All-Pros as some other ones do, and some veterans at that, and some young talent as well with Donovan Jackson emerging. So Minnesota's offensive line is going to have to revolve around Ryan Kelly being healthy, as well as another player that's going to be on this list coming up. But that's going to take us to number 4, being Byron Murphy Jr. With given the Vikings' current roster construction, no defensive player is more irreplaceable this season than Byron Murphy, their number 1 cornerback. Not only is he a Pro Bowl caliber player with coverage, versatility, and ball skills, the room behind him is filled with question marks. A Murphy-less cornerback room trio would consist of Isaiah Rodgers, Mekhi Blackman, and Jeff Okudah. That's a CB1 who's never played more than 525 snaps in a season, a CB2 coming off an ACL injury, and a CB3 on his 4th team in 4 seasons. They'd almost certainly have to trade for a corner. The Vikings CB room is a potential weakness as is, so a Murphy injury would be catastrophic loss for the outlook of this otherwise loaded defense. And I definitely agree with his ranking here. Obviously, they paid him the big bucks this offseason, so they have to make sure that he can stay healthy throughout the rest of the season. But of course, with those question marks at cornerback, it does make a good case as to why Byron Murphy is so valuable to this defense, because our entire secondary, and like a lot of the players that we're going to talk about, a lot of these units revolve around these players. The secondary used to revolve around Harrison Smith, and now it revolves around the young Byron Murphy Jr., who is trying to just be the absolute leader of this defense, especially with Harrison Smith going into his swan song season. So you want to make sure that he's healthy, not just for his contract, but also for this season, so you can get Harry to go out on top. And yes, without Byron Murphy, that cornerback room is going to be very depleted. And it's one of those positions where, like we saw with Ryan Kelly, if you take out his significance, that is a major blow where you are left with not a lot of good guys, not a lot of guys who are necessarily starter caliber quality or Pro Bowl quality, as well as Byron Murphy's shutdown abilities and all the other skills he brings. The other cornerbacks in our team do not necessarily have that, so he is going to be a huge asset. But looking at number 3, we're going back over to the offensive line, looking at Christian Darrisaw. We saw this one play out of last season when Darrisaw went down out of torn ACL and MCL in October on that Thursday night game against the Rams. The Vikings traded for Cam Robinson, who was a decent replacement at left tackle until struggling quite a bit in the 2 games where it mattered most. Of course, against the Lions and against the Rams in the playoffs. When Darrisaw is healthy, he's one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. He's a dominant force in both pass protection and run blocking, and his presence is pretty key to making the entire offense go. Once he returns from last year's injury, the Vikings need Darrisaw to stay on the field and make life easier on McCarthy and the rest of their offense. School is merely an adequate short-term backup. And yes, Christian Darrisaw, when we saw that happen last season, I don't know about you guys, but I was messaging Kirk and I was messaging any Vikings fans I knew or even football fans saying, yep, consider a deep playoff run gone at this point, because that's what you need to go on a massive run. You need a healthy and fortified offensive line that can't be penetrated. In Minnesota, our offensive line turned into Swiss cheese once he went down, because Cam Robinson, he filled in nicely, but eventually the wheels did fall off on that experiment. So with that, Christian Darrisaw is such a huge asset, especially with JJ McCarthy. They put so much effort into fortifying this offensive line, so JJ McCarthy would just have not much to worry about in his first season as a starter. So you take out Darrisaw, where like Ryan Kelly, he's a major pillar of that offensive line. That's a massive gap that is not going to be protected for JJ McCarthy, and it's going to allow a lot of pass rushes to take advantage of that. So obviously, the significance of last season in his absence compared with the potential of this season and how healthy they're looking on paper, that is going to be something major to watch for this season. And that leads us, of course, to number 2, which you guys were probably predicting who was going to be number 1 and number 2. It's just a matter of where they stood. And that is the first JJ, and that is JJ McCarthy. It would be hard to argue if you wanted to place McCarthy atop this list. The starting quarterback is the 5th most important player on almost any football team. Another McCarthy injury would be devastating to the Vikings' immediate outlook and, more importantly, to their long-term future. He needs to be on the field getting reps and developing, even if some growing pains mean the 25 season falls short of the postseason. The reason I've got McCarthy at number 2 on this list is O'Connell might be such an all-powerful quarterback genius that he could get competence out of Sam Howell, the team's new backup. Howell threw for nearly 4,000 yards with 21 touchdowns plus 21 interceptions and 65 sacks when he led the league in attempts in 23. He's got a talented arm and would find himself in the ideal situation if he ever has to play quarterback. Now, obviously, we know with the recent history with Kirk Cousins, quarterback injuries are devastating to the Vikings. When that Cousins injury happened, we all knew the season was over 2 years ago. And then even with Brett Favre coming in after that season, we were like, okay, we thought we could repeat 2009, try and go back to that and just recapture that magic that was the 09-10 season. Then he gets injured, and that season was an absolute disaster and led us to having a very high draft pick that led to Christian Ponder. We all know how that worked out. Did not work out very well. So Minnesota with quarterbacks, it's been a rough history and a rocky road ever since really Fran Tarkenton. Dante Culpepper, he was really solid, but there were some injuries there as well. There was a lot of potential with Teddy Bridgewater. Then he gets injured. Christian Ponder, that was just untapped potential. There were some injuries as well, but then again, that was more of just a talent aspect. Then, of course, move on to Kirk Cousins with that big injury. And Minnesota has been in quarterback limbo ever since J.J. McCarthy came around. It seems like, because even with Brett Favre, we knew that was not going to be very long-term. And this is the first time that we've had a long-term quarterback since Teddy Bridgewater in that experiment to see if this will hopefully end a lot better than that one did. And with Minnesota, JJ McCarthy is going to be huge because we saw what happened last year. Sam Darnold was good. He was good enough, but we all have been wondering what would have happened if JJ played last season. Would he have been excelling at the way that he was, been overhyped, or would there have been a lot of growing pains? We know there's going to be some growing pains this season. He's not going to be perfect, but if he balls out even half as good as we're expecting, Minnesota's making the playoffs for sure, and they could be on their way to at least one playoff win. We can bank on maybe one playoff win at least for sure if JJ McCarthy plays well, and then we kind of worry about the divisional and the championship round heartbreak that comes with it. But if we get the first round bye, who knows? But that's all way too far ahead. We can't think that far, especially when we haven't seen JJ McCarthy step on the field yet in a regular season. But with everything that we're seeing, with everything that he's bringing as far as energy, as far as what he's been talking about, what players and teammates have been saying, this guy seems like the real deal. And if he stays healthy, Minnesota will be dangerous. And that, of course, takes us to number one on the list, which isn't going to surprise anyone, but Justin Jefferson. It says a lot about his greatness that he lands at the top spot where the starting quarterback is at number 2. The Vikings superstar receiver is not only the team's best player by a wide margin, but he's one of the top talents in the league. And yes, he's the best wide receiver in the league, and he's probably top 5 player in the league, and he's not number 5 or number 4. And losing Jefferson for any period of time would change Kevin O'Connell's entire offense, removing the most consistent source of any chain-moving production and explosive plays. Wide receiver trio of Addison, Naylor, and Felton/Moore wouldn't be the worst in the league, but defenses would be a lot more willing to commit numbers to stopping the run. Jefferson, who hasn't missed a game in 4 of his 5 seasons, is a crucial component to McCarthy's success in 2025 and beyond. And we saw what happened when not only Kirk Cousins got injured, but when Jefferson got injured. This wide receiver room was very rough. Jordan Addison, he still played really solid as our wide receiver 1, but he didn't have the supporting cast around him to really distract from the coverage and let him get free on those, and or just for other guys to get free and be trusted on those passes, especially when you had a rotating room of quarterbacks just going in and out between Josh Dobbs, Nick Mullins, and even Jaron Hall at one point. And we had a whole list of all that controversy. But then you have this season where JJ McCarthy, he needs all of his weapons, and you keep Jefferson healthy on a big contract where he's starting that first year of the massive contract they gave him. That's going to be huge because you want to get this dynamic duo starting early. They want to hit the ground running. They had to wait an entire season because last season we heard how excited they were about playing together that season. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, and they've even talked about it, how much it sucked just having to have him on the sideline. But they were still building that rapport and building that chemistry, and now they can bring it into this season where they can absolutely dominate if both of them are fully healthy throughout the entire season. But what do you guys think about this list that Sports Illustrated posted? Do you guys think that Jefferson absolutely should be number 1? Do you think it should be McCarthy? Are there other Vikings you would have put on this list that were in the honorable mentions that you would have swapped out for the ones that made the top 5? Let us know down in the comments below what you guys have to think about this, and stay tuned for the next episode of Vikings Digest, going to be dropping tomorrow. We'll be bringing you guys a lot of updates as we get ready to start the preseason, so you won't want to miss it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss the episodes when they drop. But for that, I've been your host, Griffin. Take care.